are robots going to take over tomorrow? There's 300,000 empty roles in engineering and manufacturing. There's 50,000 empty roles in food just during the summertime when we need people to come and pick stuff off the trees and what have you to bring the food from the field into the factory. So we've got this massive volume of unfulfilled roles. So we don't need robots to take over. We need robots to come along and fill the empty roles and the yawning gaps that we have within our manufacturing.
Resistance is futile.
Welcome to the podcast,
where we explore what's happening with AI, business, automation and culture, and ask,
where on earth is all this going? Are we really on the cusp of some AI and robotics takeover? Every ChatGPT and now Google Gemini release comes with a flurry of keynote demos that are very reminiscent of the Apple keynotes. They know this kind of marketing works, and to avoid sounding cynical, it's not that these tools are not impressive. They are. Both Jamie and I love this stuff, but there's a difference between being excited and being gullible. So I want to take a step back and interrogate where exactly we are in terms of AI and robotics. Now, I've worked in video for businesses since it was the big, new, exciting thing, and it's taken about 15 years for video, a pretty simple technology really, to become completely normal for all businesses. But AI and robotics are not simple and will disrupt businesses a lot more. So it's not like changing a few processes here and there. So this week, I have two people on the forefront of actually selling this technology to businesses right now. And I thought it would be good to ask them, what are businesses actually buying and how does that compare to the hype we see in the marketing from big tech like OpenAI and Google? We have our resident AI expert, Jamie from Automate, who works with businesses to implement the software side. And we have Peter, Jamie's brother from another mother, from Automate UK, who has been working with businesses on the robotics side, the hardware of this revolution. So I'm going to be very much a third leg in this discussion. Jamie from Automate, meet Peter from Automate UK.
That's a great name for a company, Peter. I wish I'd got there before you.
Do you guys have the same marketing company? That's what
Yeah,
I'm wondering.
you must be.
Yeah, we should compare notes on that front.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, just a little bit more background, just how I was framing. I'm going to frame this, and then I'm going to get both you, Peter, and Jamie to jump in and help me understand this. But a good way I thought of understanding the challenges and why robots won't be taking over next week is the per capita metric of robots versus workers, because this can give you an idea of where the robot take-up will actually be most visible, and we can learn the most from the highest density of robots. That's my thinking anyway. So you guys are going to correct me if I'm wrong or if it needs more qualifying, but that's the idea. So if we think about the latest figures from the top countries in terms of robot density per 10,000 employees, reflecting their current standing in automation from the International Federation of Robotics, you've got South Korea's number one by miles at 1,012 robots per 10,000 employees. So, roughly 10% of all workers in South Korea are robots, which is pretty impressive. Singapore's next at 730. Now, both of those countries are relatively small compared to some of the big countries in the OECD. So I think Germany's actually perhaps the most impressive because with a large population, they're actually half or just under half of South Korea's. They're 415 robots per 10,000 and ahead of Japan just by a bit, who are 397. And then you've got China is in the same league as Japan now with 392 robots per 10,000. Okay, so that should give you an idea of the sort of numbers we're talking about. And if we go down the scale, you've got United States at 285, and way out the back door, I won't even tell you the number, UK is down there on 98 for every 10,000. So what is that?
Top job,
what are
Peter.
those figures?
You should be working harder. There should be more than that, shouldn't there?
We should be working, yeah, exactly. So what do those figures tell you, Peter and Jamie?
I guess what it tells us is that we should have been doing a better job, as Jamie said, about advocating the benefits of automation. I think one of the things it tells us is that the UK market is a pretty conservative market when it comes to adoption of new technologies, and we are behind a lot of other manufacturers or other manufacturing nations when it comes to the adoption of robotics. I think actually I've been doing this, speaking about this for so long. I know that we're 25th in the world at the moment on 98, and but we're 25th in the world when it comes to robot density, but we're the 8th biggest manufacturing nation in the world, which kind of tells you there's a big disparity between how much we produce and how much we use automation to produce that product.
Does that mean we're
And
using more manpower instead?
yeah, absolutely. As a nation, we have been extremely reliant on low-cost labour to produce our product. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's been a few things that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years that have reduced our ability to recruit and employ low-cost labour.
Can't think what you're talking about.
Yeah.
No idea what you're talking about. Yeah, let's not mention
to avoid
the
a
B word.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but you've had that, and you've had COVID, of course, which have reduced that access to labour. So, when you were framing your question earlier about how many, are robots going to take over tomorrow? There's 300,000 empty roles in engineering and manufacturing. There's 50,000 empty roles in food. Just during the summertime, when we need people to come and pick stuff off the trees and what have you to bring the food from the field into the factory. So we've got this massive volume of unfulfilled roles. So we don't need robots to take over. We need robots to come along and fill the empty roles and the yawning gaps that we have within our manufacturing.
But basically, you robots taking over is just not the worry at all.
In my perception, no. It's from what we're hearing, it's very much a case of people are struggling to recruit, so they need robots to take on that low-hanging fruit, as I said. Now, clearly, we have to be mindful about the sort of roles they're going to take on and what that means for people's jobs and how they move from maybe lower-skilled jobs into more high-skilled jobs. But most of the people we see that are adopting automation are actually recruiting or needing to recruit more people, as well as adopting the automation, but just in different roles.
Is free movement of robots between Europe and the UK allowed? Sorry, I'm good. I had to
say that. We can import them free into the UK without duty.
Right, okay.
Because we have no indigenous robot manufacturers in the UK. It's identified as being one of the products that is duty-free, so to prevent there being barriers to importing the product into the UK. So the government have at least had that foresight. Again, that's another example. There are no robot manufacturers in the UK to speak of in terms of industrial robotics.
Really? There's no one in the UK doing it?
No, there's plenty of companies that are taking, the main brand robots that are manufactured outside of the UK and creating solutions with them, perhaps building them into their own solution. But actually, in terms of just out and out building a 6-axis robot for an industrial application, we don't have any in the UK.
And is part of the challenge that the UK as a manufacturing country, it's my understanding, and I'm no economist, but my understanding is that we're not great at that as a lot of our power goes into financial services and customer services, those kind of things, as opposed to manufacturing, when everyone kind of talks about the fact that we don't produce anything here. Is that part of the problem as well?
I mean, that's kind of quite a perception that I think we're trying our best to change. Alongside, the association I work for, we sort of filter into Make UK, who are the major manufacturing association for the UK, and they're very, very much, that GDP associated to manufacturing could be as much, or if not more than 20%, when you factor in all of the other bits and pieces that fit around it to support manufacturing. So 20% of our GDP is the sixth largest nation in the world. We are still the 8th largest manufacturer globally. So the problem is, it's a perception. It's in the press. It's essentially the way, the government has spoken. They don't mention manufacturing a lot. It's becoming more mentioned, but they don't mention it a lot. It's definitely been a shift over the last, really since COVID, I think, when people saw the benefit of being able to manufacture things in the UK.
Exactly. That's definitely part of it. I want to pick up on that. So, and the UK might actually be typical of the narrative that's going on everywhere in the developed world, where we perceive that because financialization services in the UK is quite acute, have taken over as the leading generator of money, it seems. The idea is that the manufacturing sector has shrunk, but it hasn't actually shrunk. It's the same or larger. It's just that it's a smaller percentage of GDP, perhaps. So it's still huge. And I think there's that perception that it's not important. It's absolutely vital. It's where all the innovation actually happens in the economy that, you know, the finance sector can't mimic. When you want to make stuff and you want to innovate and make, continue progress, then that comes from highly advanced manufacturing, right? So what about that idea, that manufacturing then hasn't gone away, like you say, and that the UK could well benefit massively, as other countries could, from taking up robotics faster rather than worrying about these sort of semantics about whether or not robots are taking over or not?
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised to hear, as an advocate for automation and running the association that wants our members to sell more product, that I would think, I feel very, very strongly that greater adoption of automation would be beneficial to manufacturing in the UK. There are clearly ethical things that you need to consider in the process of doing it. But I still feel that we're so far behind other nations and that there's so much empty space for robots to come in and fulfill that, yeah, massively, it would have a huge impact on productivity. It would have a huge impact on our ability to manufacture more for less. And I think, if you go back to when we were perceived to be more of a manufacturing powerhouse, we had these big factories with thousands and thousands of people working in them that weren't as automated as they could have been. You look at our automotive industry, and it really fell away because we didn't embrace and adopt automation technology. Yeah. We now have highly automated plants back in the UK, but it's all technology that's been brought in from, Nissan is a hugely productive plant, but the mentality and the thought behind it has come from the country, the parent country of the business. Very much is true of the other automated businesses like VW and Ford and people like that who have manufacturing plants here in the UK.
So do you mind me asking, is the barrier, I mean, yes, I'm in automation, but obviously a completely different side of automation to you. And is the barrier, my interpretation or perception is that the barrier would probably be both kind of cost to implement something like that, but also just gnarly change, it's not just like you put this thing in the corner, it does what it's meant to do. You're talking about changing entire kind of workflows and just everything. That's the impression I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk to people we've done some surveys historically, and there are a number of surveys by a variety of associations that talking to member companies about, or talking to businesses about, why they haven't adopted automation. Cost and complexity is definitely one of them. The UK manufacturing industry is made up of a lot of SMEs. Right. And I think for SMEs, sometimes the cost and complexity perception is a challenge. Now, as is true with most technologies, those challenges are starting to be broken down because, if you take people in their latter years, they would have been brought up with technology, but they're now adapting to the use of mobile phones and everything because they've been made so much more intuitive and much more easy to adopt. That obviously is also happening within sort of automation technologies. But so, yeah, the cost and complexity side is one of those things. But there is a real cultural barrier to change within UK manufacturing, particularly around automation and robotics. I think the fear of jobs being taken, the fear of changing processes for what negative impact it might have, and also just historically, cheap labour has been fairly easy to access. So
why
it's easier? So let's do that rather than invest. And I think
part of a short-term versus long-term investment thing. So if you can fill the gap with cheap labour for now, you can fix it. So it's always a band-aid solution. I wondered how it is that, say, the UK, for example, still tends to have hand-washing car washes, for example. Like, it's outside of manufacturing, I know, but there's a culture of accepting that, you can get your car washed by hand. You go to most places in Europe, the idea of someone doing hand car wash, depending on where you are, is kind of absurd. Like, a machine's been able to do that since the 80s.
Isn't that more to do with they're a fantastic way to wash money?
Yeah, maybe. What is the cultural factor? Because is it the same cultural factor as at play here, Peter? I don't know. Because cultural is the acceptance of it, and it's a easier way to invest in a setup than investing in the technology to make that technology cheaper over time to wash cars to the same standard.
I mean, I think it is kind of as simple as that. It's less complicated to go out and find someone to employ to do the job than it is to invest in automation. And you get an immediate return if you employ a person, they're out there earning money to you straight away and they're doing the job, and it's immediate. Whereas if you take a chunk of money and invest it in automation, there's a payback over a period of time. I would probably say that in the UK, we maybe are a little bit too optimistic in how quickly things should pay back. So other nations might be more willing to accept a 3, 4, 5 year payback on investment in plant and capital. In the UK, sometimes people are much more keen to see that sort of immediate return, which is just, to be honest, just a bit unrealistic.
Jamie, your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I was just thinking about that, and what was coming to mind when funny enough, talking about car washing, which I know is not what Peter does, but is
just be very clear, Peter does not do car washing machines.
Well, I don't mind washing my car at the weekend, but anyway,
it's another matter.
But I was just thinking about that and thinking about when I think of a factory producing things, and I think of robots or robotic stuff automating that process. It seems it's something, doing something very specific, moving something in a particular way, screwing in a particular way, and then the car or whatever moves down the line. And when I think of washing a car, just as an example, I think it seems easier to get a human to do it, because I can just say, go over there, copy the other guy and just wash the car. And there's so many different things going on in reality, it's kind of about how they do that. And it got me thinking about, I suppose, what is this new world of robotics, where we're seeing the Tesla robots and we're seeing the Boston Dynamics stuff and this thing. And I'm wondering whether, because those do seem to be more adaptable and able to do more than maybe one or two things, and they could potentially watch someone doing a process, whether that might change the attitude. You can imagine a humanoid robot doing the car washing, but trying to get your head around creating a car wash, like an arm that comes down and washes and stuff like that. It seems, to me, it seems that would be more difficult than training a human-looking robot. No, maybe that's totally wrong, but that's just my impression.
I mean, I think there's some element of truth in that. I mean, one of the really good examples is agriculture. So agriculture has been very, okay, you've got machinery, you've got automated machinery, you've got, automated milking of cows, right, for example. Yeah. But generally, a lot of processes in agriculture haven't been automated because there's been an abundance of cheap labour. And actually, although some of the tasks are quite low skilled, the inherent capabilities that humans have, like detecting whether a piece of fruit is ripe, being able to manually dexterous enough to be able to move it to a position where they don't damage the plant when they pick it, and all that kind of thing. Yeah. Although it's low skill for human, it's actually quite a complex task to automate, because you have to attach vision to it. You have to attach some sort of sense of force detection, so you're not damaging the fruit when you're taking it off the tree. So it's an easy task that is quite complex and quite expensive to automate. The only time you'll ever get people going as far as automating it is when you can't find people to physically do it, and the product sits there and the plant rots and not going anywhere. So it's the necessity that drives it.
Yeah,
which is where we're at, isn't it? In some sectors of the industry.
And that's starting to happen in agriculture. Agri-bots, agri-tech is something that's really booming at the moment, because people are identifying that, the lack of ability to recruit, and the only solution is to automate.
And it's pretty remarkable that, sorry, Jamie, one sec, just has just this thought that we've had a reduction in manual labour in agriculture from, depending on where you start, roughly the early 1800s, from about 90-something%, right, of the population just in agriculture, depending on the country, down to 1 or 2% in most countries now. And we're talking about, still having a problem of maybe automating it even further, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. So agriculture is probably the leader in terms of what we are able to automate, how many processes we're able to automate without humans. It's been quite remarkable when you look at it over a long enough time span. Do you see it possible that, just aside from the hype of it happening tomorrow, do you see other sectors going that way and copying agriculture and needing fewer and fewer people over time? Or is there some sectors that are just never going to be like that and we just need people in them, and quite a lot of them all the time?
I'd love to have a straightforward answer to that. I think there are some obvious industries that will become more and more automated. If you look at logistics, I think that's an area where you've got lots of people moving pallets around the factory, picking and placing boxes, stacking boxes on pallets. We're already starting to see that becoming more and more automated. But with the advent of things like autonomous mobile robots and various different technologies that sit nicely within that space, you can get to a point where you can almost see that you can have machinery literally going from picking products off the shelf to be going out the door in a stretch-strapped pallet, and the whole process from A to B has been automated. You take that then the next step further to autonomous vehicles driving, delivering it from point A to point B. You can see an industry there that becomes almost devoid of humans. The bit that I don't have the answer to, and I think that Jamie would have far greater answer to, is then there are all sorts of processes that are more clerical in nature rather than the physical automation that sit alongside that. Do the humans go away from the dull, dirty and dangerous into the office, into a different environment? Or does that get automated as well? And it's quite a challenge to understand exactly how that will look. So yeah, I'd be interested just to get Jamie's take on that in terms of what that looks like from a sort of clerical standpoint.
I'll tell you my view on that in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you about my date in Brazil with my wife, but in an abattoir. We decided to spend the day going around.
What a date!
Yeah, I know how to treat a woman. I know how to treat a woman. I should give some context here in her entire career. Her entire career has been in meat processing in Brazil. And we got invited to a beef processing unit. Now, I didn't want to see the actual slitting of the throat, but what I did see is when the carcass came in and then went through the processing, and it really was fascinating because it was an army, in this case, of humans. There was literally a lot of conveyor belt, if you can imagine, and hundreds of humans. One would take the skin off, the next person would do this joint, the next person would trim off the fat. And they spend years kind of being an apprentice to learn the thing. However, her background is chicken abattoirs. And she said you'd be surprised that most of the processing of chickens is totally done by robots and machinery now. Virtually everything. So I can imagine a time where that will progress to beef. But I digress. In answer to your question, the administration side is absolutely the side that we're now kind of seeing and doing automation for. So you talk about the kind of the dirty and dull work, in the kind of factory environment or the agricultural environment. I guess what we're tackling is the dull drudgery work that's in the office environment. So the clerical work and the administrative work, that's where it's starting. So what you're seeing is businesses are trying to lower their costs, first of all. So they're trying to, if you're paying someone 25, 30 grand a year to move numbers around, between, I don't know, Sage or SAP and Salesforce, they want to, cut that by a significant amount and be able to process it much faster. So that bottom, I don't want to call them the bottom layer, but that kind of administrative layer is definitely being automated. And you think, okay, well, that's good. That can be good. But then the next layer up, the more kind of intelligent interpretation, strategy side, the very human side, that's where the talent needs to go. And it is to a certain extent. But actually, now as AI is moving on so quickly, that's kind of phase 2. Because what happens is people start with the administrative stuff, and then they start looking at the things where the AI can get involved. And actually, what it seems is going to be left for humans to do is, I guess, what I tend to term the special sauce, which is the relationships, the account management, the human side of it. That bit, going and meeting someone and having a bit with them and talking about, work and family and life. That's where it gets left. And I guess what's very worrying is not everyone is a salesperson. Not everyone has got those skills. Not everyone wants to do that. And what happens to the people that don't do that or can't do that? That's the big question.
Yeah, and I think that's something that needs massive consideration from a physical automation adoption standpoint as well.
Yeah.
In that, okay, at the moment, I'm not only concerned about it in the short term because there's so many empty roles that we need to fill first.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get to the point when we get past that, or actually some of the empty roles are harder to automate, and you start automating some of the roles that you have got plenty of workers for.
Yeah.
It's how you redeploy that workforce into meaningful roles for them. And it's the sort of thing that businesses need to be starting to think about now. From an ethical standpoint, I think is, yes, there's always the consideration of is it commercially viable, and that's what drives ultimately progress, right? It's growth, it's financial. But I think businesses are far better at understanding their responsibilities from a sustainability, corporate standpoint, corporate social responsibility policies, etc.
Yep.
I think it's something that manufacturing businesses or even more service-based industries looking at the type of technology that you've been talking about actually start to think about what happens to the workforce, how do they transition them into different places, what's the ethical, what's the corporate standpoint on how we make sure that we upskill the workforce. But yeah, moving forward. So I do think it's up to us to be having those conversations now to make sure they get considered and we start to build a plan forward.
I had a very interesting chat with Alex Howlett from the Gresham Institute last week, and he's been doing a lot of research on UBI and how it would impact the workforce, among other things, and the economy in general, and looking at entire theory of money and everything. So he's coming at this from a very different point of view, and I was asking him about this problem of AI and robotics. And he was saying, well, this stuff's not going to take over. It can't, because there is no incentive, like in the UK, where it's acutely shown, to not employ people at lower rates, because they don't. You can get them. They're going to work for you. So somebody's always going to be available to work at lower rates. So therefore, his answer was graduated UBI, because you don't say what the amount is. You graduate it in until you find that you're killing off the work and tasks that don't need doing already, and then you can pay for those that can be automated. In actual fact, you would increase automation quicker that way by sending a market signal, so that we can more quickly find out the tasks that need doing in any organization more acutely, and automate those as necessary. So I thought that was a very different take on it. And also because what you're saying, Peter, is you would hope that bigger companies, or any company, is thinking ethically about its workforce and finding the meaningful work and so on. But of course, they're up against people that are not thinking like that are just going to, make sure the bottom line's right. So the labor force is a big factor. And if there's any way that it's possible to cut that bill, people do. I mean, they have to. That's the way we've structured the economy.
They do it already.
They do it already.
I mean,
offshoring.
But it's been happening for certainly hundreds of years, hasn't it? I mean, the Industrial Revolution in the UK was started in 17, whenever. And, that was the first start of automated processes that were actually meaning that you can produce in larger numbers and you need fewer people in order to get it.
Yeah, exactly.
Now,
it's not new.
So automation as a concept isn't new. And of course, across the last 300 years, 250 years, since that time, if my maths is right, the people have migrated from very, very, like you said, huge amount of people based in agriculture producing small amount of foods enough to feed a small amount of people, through to agriculture being more mass produced for a far larger population, and then migrating to other roles. And at the time, sure as anything, there weren't people sitting around having podcasts talking about what the future of the workforce was like during the Industrial Revolution. It just wasn't even a consideration, and people naturally evolved into other work. So I think an element of that will certainly happen, that there are jobs that we don't even know that exist at this stage, which will absorb some of the jobs that would potentially be displaced by automation. But I do also think people are, as a general rule, there is a greater acceptance of having the conversation around what is right ethically and what impact this will have, and try to mitigate some of those impacts.
Yeah, I think that's my contention. Is I'm very bullish on the future, but exactly how disruptive the process of getting there will be and how soon it is the bit that's up in the air as far as I can see, and depending on geography as well, because various countries, as we've seen from just the robotics number, are further along this road than others. I mean, South Korea is so advanced in so many ways, actually, not just in robotics. It's a really good example of maybe a blind spot that we in the West have towards the development of Asia towards much more advanced AI and robotics, I think, generally. But anyway, that's maybe another issue. Yeah, Jamie, I think I want to hear more on your perception of what Peter was saying about those clerical tasks. I know you touched on it, but what's your instinct about how fast these things can make a difference in terms of, the AI is arriving tomorrow? We've talked about this before, but just alongside what Peter was saying about the challenges, practically speaking, do you see any places where these sectors really could just change dramatically overnight at all?
Yeah, so I think I've talked about it before. So any industry where it's very repetitive to start with. So accountants, there's been a couple of exhibitions recently which are specifically around the tech in accountancy, and that's an industry that is changing massively and very quickly, because just think about what people spend a lot of their time doing. It is spreadsheets and numbers and checking, things that are absolutely perfect for automation. So that's an industry that's absolutely being hit by it and affected by it, and it's bringing in other considerations. So some of the conversations I'm having with accountants is typically when you train to be an accountant, you'll do your qualifications, but it used to be called doing your articles. You'd work in an accountancy firm to do your training, and you'd really just be doing the kind of the donkey work for about 3 years, just so you can understand how it all works. But actually, that basic administrative work now is being automated. So the question is, how are they going to learn what you learn by doing that type of work? So that presents some challenges. We've got some other clients who are, I'd kind of loosely call them manufacturing and engineering. And they're really interesting because they really are embracing it. So they seem to really, maybe because of the engineering mindset, got a couple of them who kind of use lean methodologies. And if you think in that way, you can see when you have meetings with them, you think in that way, everything is a thought, well, how can we improve that? How can we make that better? How can we make that more efficient? We've got one example at the moment where we've put quite a few kind of automations in there. One of them's thrown an exception because it's waiting for certain reports from humans. And I say, we just, we haven't planned for those exceptions because you need the human to put that bit of information in. And their response is always, well, lean thinking, can't we just automate everything that's happening here? So even what the humans are doing to kind of generate, and it's constantly looking at that to automate. So you can see that is an industry, maybe just because of their nature, that are kind of embracing it more than others.
To round things up here a little bit, what I wanted to do from both of you is I want to try and take where you guys would combine. Imagine your powers combined. So software into a robot, and we've seen that with Tesla, we've seen that with Tesla Bot, and we're seeing that with Figaro 1, among others. Atlas, I think the new one from Boston Dynamics is doing a similar thing. So seems to like a constellation of combined robotics and AI vision and so on. And what's your take on what the best of those robots might do in the next few years, and whether or not there are specialist tasks especially in manufacturing? I think that's where it seems obvious, but maybe less obvious roles where those robots might actually surprise us. Do you think?
So I guess from my perspective, within the manufacturing sector, I mean, AI has already been kind of around it's not a new technology.
The public have only really seen it through ChatGPT, haven't they? But it's been around for a long time. Yeah.
So in terms of, particularly in sort of like machine vision applications where you're using AI to kind of enhance an image or to support some decision making that the robot would have around, identifying a part or something like that, AI has been used for quite a period of time. And I think that's where the benefit of AI is within automation, is to have that kind of either that slight element of predictiveness or that element of machine learning that is definitely, would then help utilize skills that are on the wane. If you look at manufacturing, welding, trying to recruit highly skilled welders is very, very challenging. So if you've got a lot of welding tasks that you need to do, the ideal scenario is that you've got one skilled welder that can oversee 2 or 3 robots that are doing the less skilled work, and they can learn that work from the skilled welder, and then the welder can then focus on the more skilled, the more difficult work. So actually, you've then got one welder who's more productive, whose job is safeguarded, but we haven't got thousands and thousands of people that want to become a welder. That's just a job people don't want to do anymore. So that's, again, it's like the fear of robots taking jobs. Well, if no one wants to do the job, what other option do you have? So I think that's somewhere where I would really, personally, that's where I'd like to see the development be, around using AI to support that sort of machine learning, particularly around the areas where skills are more scarce.
That's really interesting, because I guess the world that you're in, it's really interesting to speak to you about this, because the parallels are there, but it's a slightly different take, because you have in I suppose the world that I live in, where it's office work and those tasks are being automated. There's no shortage of people who do office work. I always forget if it's white collar or blue collar, but it's in the offices doing their work. So it seems there's no shortage of people at the moment that want to do that work, but those are the roles which are going to be impacted by automation. But I guess what we're seeing with some of our clients is the younger generation don't really want to do that type of work either. They don't want to do that the kind of mundane type of work, that kind of drudgery work. They want to be doing stuff that's more compelling and more involving and more interesting. So you can see that, if you were planning ahead, there's already a kind of glut of new people that want to come in and do these roles. They don't want to do that work. So maybe what you're talking about is where the office-based work is going to be in maybe 20 years' time. That new generation kind of comes up and doesn't want to do that work.
Well, I guess, is there not an element where that's kind of already happened a little bit within the office space? Because, I know it's hard to believe and I don't look old enough, but when I first started working, the first company I had, we had a bank of secretaries. Yeah. And you would dictate what you wanted to say in a letter, and then you'd take that over to the secretaries who would type it out. Yeah. Who has a pool of secretaries now in the business? Everyone just goes straight into their PC and just types a letter or an email or whatever. And so that, being able to touch type and speed type, and that, it's already a job that's just disappeared. Yeah. Are all of those people now unemployed, or are they employed in other roles? That's the question that I have, because it then helps you understand, maybe technology has always progressed and it's always meant that certain roles have become redundant. It's a question of, what do those people then go on and do? What are the lessons that we can learn from that, and how can we apply it moving forward?
Yeah. Well, I think it's always been the fact that technology does do that disruption and does things adapt, and also there's a limit. We were chatting with Ty Keynes, who's a system dynamics practitioner, and he made the interesting observation that automation can only progress to a certain level which the economy can absorb a number of people being not in work, right? And what's going on with my background?
I don't know. I think I just did something. I think I did like that, and it kind of just.
I love it. I want more.
Very happy with what you said, whatever it was.
Yeah. I think
sorry about that.
That's brilliant. And he was talking about how I didn't even know you could do it. So the idea that once you get you lose demand, i.e., people are not earning very much, then they can't buy the things that are being offered by advanced automation or certain products and services, and so therefore you need people back in the economy. And so to some degree there's a buffer there, but the problem with it, thinking like that, is that we assume that highly disruptive, very fast change, it can be adapted to, and that isn't the case. So I think that's the thing that's different about what's going on now, is gauging whether or not some of these changes, like you're saying, Peter, some of these changes need to happen quick, especially in a place like the UK, where it's like, there's processes here that need this help. So there's a nuanced approach to this. But in some other places, it might be so disruptive and so quick, especially, and I think in Jamie's space, where something that was professional and highly paid is suddenly en masse just annihilated by AI and automation. That's a different thing.
To go back, I really like what you're saying, Peter, about the kind of let's look at what happened in the past. The kind of the pool, the secretary pool, something like that. But what I think has happened, and I think about this in terms of the context of what we do, is that if you go back to, I guess, the personal computer when that started and word processing and things like that, and that changed the world of secretarial work and things like that. Actually, what's happened is you used to. I always use the example of Mad Men, the TV series Mad Men, and kind of Don Draper. So Don Draper used to walk into a room, have his great inspirational idea, smoke a fag, drink a whiskey, and then walk out and go on to the next one. And then all the work would be done by the pool of secretaries and typists. But what happens now, if that was being filmed now, is Don Draper would go in, have his meeting, he wouldn't smoke a cigarette and he wouldn't drink a whiskey. Then he'd have to get his laptop out, type up everything that he talked about. He'd then have to email it to all the relevant bits. So what's happened is all these outsourced tasks have now come back into our own control. So it's quite, I used to have a PA, I don't have a PA anymore, and I rarely meet people who have PAs anymore. So we've ended up doing more and more of our own administration and stuff like that. And so when I look at what we do with automation, a lot of that conversation is about actually getting your people to do what they're good at, their Don Draperness, and allow this other stuff to go away. So it's like a big pendulum has swung one way, and now it kind of needs to swing maybe back the other way, where instead of employing other people to do that stuff, you've got automation and you've got robotics to do some of that work. And maybe that's why we're all tired all the time.
Well, one of the, I guess one of the arguments is that people can still be employed, but they just need to come in for that 30 minutes flash of inspiration every day to earn the same amount as they do now when they work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. I mean, that's the nirvana, isn't it? You can add enough value in a short enough space of time that you're still meaningfully employed and you still have the ability to go out and spend and buy. You've got more free time in which to do it with, because a lot of this stuff has been implemented. And now, whether that will actually happen or whether a few select very wealthy people will have control of all of it and everyone else will be out of work, maybe that's the way it will go. But I mean, that's the sort of utopia for everyone, isn't it? Is that you end up in this point where everyone does what they want to do and earns enough doing what they want to do to have a nice way of life.
Well, that's the conversation we ought to be having, and the idea that it does end up just in a sort of feudalism with a few people owning every machine would be absurd if we allowed it to happen. So I think,
yeah, absolutely. That's the bit that you have to avoid. You have to,
and that's political, of course, and because you can't just say, "Oh, we'll just see what happens." Well, I don't think it's wise, put it that way. So I think, but that is a good conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't seem to be the case.
Yeah, it does seem to be the case. It's happening. No, that's. But I think this is part of why I'm interested in all of this. Is not just because I'm a political animal. I'm much more interested in the technology and what it can do for us, and trying to explain it to people who are just coming new to it. But it's unavoidable that there is a political element to it, and we shouldn't really be afraid of that. So I think, that should be something that we're able to talk about more readily. And I'm trying to bring those bits of the conversation in as well, so people can see what other tools are out there. Look, I think that's a really good place to leave it. Unless, Jamie, did that make you think of anything that you wanted to chat about?
No, just that I was just kind of pondering on what Pete said about the kind of the corporate governance side of things. And you can kind of see something like that if you had to consider a government that wanted to kind of impose this. You can see this actually being quite a good thing, because they are imposing things about the environment. You shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, and quite rightly for a greater good. And actually, the idea of having some kind of regulation rules that say, look, if you're going to automate as a business, then you need to make sure that you're training staff for new roles, or I like that idea, that kind of consideration, because it needs to be a consideration, and I think that's for the greater good. So it's an interesting idea.
So just quickly as we wrap up, Peter, do you want to let the audience know where they could find out what you do, and perhaps they might be able to contact you or a colleague best to that where Automate UK helps best? I think, what's the best thing for them to do if they want to know more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just contact us. If you Google Automate in the UK, we come up pretty high. And And my email address, I'm quite happy for people to contact me via email. It's peter.williamson@automate-uk.com.
Superb. Good stuff. Good to chat with you, Peter. And Jamie, thanks for those points of view as well. Honestly, brothers from another mother. I think that's what you are. And
I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Good stuff. Take care for now.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Thank you.
Resistance is futile.